Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Film East Chats from Lowestoft Film Festival. I'm Shelby Cooke, head curator and editor-in-chief at Film East. We're very excited to be working with Lowestoft Film Festival this year to bring you content before, during, and after the film festival. Lowestoft is Britain's most easternly film festival that brings together independent filmmakers and celebrates all things film and the industry as a whole. It's a really exciting place to discover new emerging talent and those independent creatives that have yet to be discovered. And speaking of which, we have the opportunity here on this episode of Film East Chats to speak to some of those filmmakers and creatives. In this two-part episode, we're going to bring you 4 unique interviews that featured the directors, the stars, writers, and more from 4 of the film festival's nominated films. These interviews will go out before the festival launches on October 20th, providing you with some content to get you excited for the films that are screening at Lowestoft. During the festival, my fellow programmer, Neve Brooke, will be in Lowestoft to host an in-person Q&A during the Queer Shorts presentation on Saturday, October 21st. And then finally, after the festival, Neve and I will come together to discuss our overall thoughts of the festival and some of the films that we saw and what we enjoyed. So do please enjoy this special episode featuring interviews from the creative teams behind the short films Jigging, Typical, I Am Light, and Beyond Desire. In this segment, I'm very excited to be able to talk to Sarah Leigh, who is the writer and director of the nominated film Typical. Typical is in the drama strand at Lowestoft, and it's about a group of disabled individuals who are frustrated by how they are treated and want to challenge the narrative and barriers that society has placed upon them. It's a very wonderful short film that was adapted from a stage play that features monologues and dialogue directly from its disabled cast. It was wonderful being able to talk to Sarah, particularly because I learned a lot about her vast career and the different fields that she worked in before finding her way into filmmaking. She talks about her production company, Inclusivity Films, and the wonderful work that they're doing, championing diverse storytelling and ensuring the authenticity of these stories by including actors and creatives who have these lived experiences. So please enjoy my conversation with Sarah Leigh, director and writer of Typical. Can you start off by telling us about sort of your experience getting into the industry and how this particular film came about?
Sure. So getting into the industry is quite a different sort of path, I guess. I started off as a journalist in TV news, was my very first foray into TV. And then I was an actor for 15 years. So I was on the other side of the camera. Never felt like I was fully, I guess I never felt that I can say it now, it never felt fully accessible to me. Mm-hmm. So it's something I can look back on now and just say I didn't really feel like I quite fit in a lot of the time. And that's a whole history of stuff. But I've always written about vampires and witches in particular. It's like my special interest. So I was a storyteller at heart, journalism, acting, all storytelling. And it was during the pandemic, actually, that I started writing a bit more, writing screenplays, as many people did during lockdown. And it was there that I was like, well, these are the stories I actually want to tell. I had very little control over what I was cast in. I could say, the types of roles I want to be put forward for, but those scripts could change and it wouldn't always necessarily be characters that I was happy playing. So I think being able to create my own story is what led me to becoming a writer-director. Typical came about because first of all, it was a stage play. It went to Edinburgh in 2019 with Bedazzle Inclusive Productions. And it was Diane and Hannah from Bedazzle Inclusive Productions that asked me to write the screenplay, adapt it into a screenplay. So the original stage play the original stage play was written by Matthew Hunt, and I took it and just created it to make it more, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but make it more like it was in the real world of
Yeah.
sorts. The stage play was very much a black backdrop, everyone wearing black, and they were moving in and out of boxes, and it was a fantastic piece of theatre, but it was very much a piece of theatre. So wanting to make it, how could we make that then into a narrative film? So yeah, I was very lucky that I got to work with some of the actors from the stage play as well, and some new actors.
Fabulous. Um, Speaking of actors, I'm really interested in how the cast came to be. I guess as you said, that probably a lot of them were already casted in the theater show, so I don't know how much you could speak to this, but the ones that are new to the film, how did they become part of the project, and what was sort of the selection process for creating your cast of performers?
Sure. So the actors in typical, I think there were three actors of the main cast who were in the original but weren't necessarily playing the same characters. Two of them were. So we already had them, but we did change the dialogue slightly with them. So the dialogue is all verbatim. It's come from their own lived experience. And we've just made that into the world of film as well, and written around to do with the situations and the settings, the locations. So we already did have quite a few actors on board, and some of the other actors because it was quite an ensemble piece, we had those in different roles within the film. The role of James, which is played by Angus Gibson in typical, was a different actor. It was written as it was a lived experience of an autistic actor in the play, and we wanted it to be an autistic actor playing this role in the film. So authentic representation is really important to us. But obviously it wasn't his words verbatim, so we had to make sure that was a situation that he resonated with. And it's because, being autistic myself, I know we're not all the same, and we all experience things the same way. So it was really important that whoever came on board, it resonated with them, and luckily it did with Angus. So we had a bit of an audition workshop with different actors. This was across the board with everybody, and we did 2 days of workshopping, and some of the dialogue that is in the film came out of that, out of those workshops. There's a scene in the gym where people are saying kind of one-liners really about how they feel about how society treat them as a disabled person, and that stuff came out during the workshop from the actors involved.
Wow, that's really, really interesting, because especially in that opening sort of gym scene, there is like a lot of sarcasm that comes from where has this very, tongue-in-cheek, sort of like, oh, the woman that is the able-bodied person is very like, we are here, we're the ones that can help you. And then of course all of the disabled people have their one-liners about, well, you're not actually really helping me. So I did really enjoy that sort of tongue-in-cheek, sort of sarcasm element to the story. And I found it really powerful how you switch from those sort of funny, jovial moments to these really heartbreaking scenes. I'm thinking particularly of the person in the wheelchair trying to get into their bed because the staff just left them there. What was this a conscious choice to go from these sort of comedy elements into these very dramatic storytellings, or was that something that sort of came about just looking at these monologues that were written?
Actually, it's funny you should say that, because I'd never seen it as being comedic, or so from my own experiences, I think that came. So there's obviously, I can't speak to how it was written in the stage play, but adapting this and some of the words that are used within the non-disabled character, the assessor, played by Diane Cleland, when she was speaking, it's very much stuff that I have heard before from professionals. I have a disabled son, and it's something we come across, oh, he can't do this, he can't do that. So as much as it does sound sarcastic, it is real life as well. These things get told to us all the time. So it's wanting to portray that. But then there are definitely jovial moments as well, like the nightclub stuff. I think is, that's okay to want to go and do stuff on your own, and showing that. And but it's like you say, with the carers and Nick, who's a wheelchair user, and the experience of that some of that came about during the shoot as well. I think it's true what they say, that you write it 3 times. You write the script and then you shoot it, and then you do the edit, and then it
Mm-hmm.
changes again. But stuff came up in the shoot, and it was really collaborative with Nick, the actor, as to what we were going to portray. And so we just, yeah, went with it.
Obviously, the story is very personal to you. Just learning about these things that you're saying. Why did you want to tell this story about these people, and what sort of connection did you want audiences to feel, not only for your own story as a filmmaker who has these experience in making this film, from those authentic experience, but also from the people who are speaking these words during the film?
So this story for me, so I launched Inclusivity Films back in 2022, so it's fairly new, and it was with a view to telling social impact stories, but also stories that aren't just about disability, and but still fully represented on and off screen. So disability is incidental to the plot, but we're
Yeah.
seeing that representation. So for me, this was a great film to start on. I was lucky to be asked to be involved with it, because it wasn't originally my piece of art to adapt. And I think it was a great way for me to get what I'm about into the industry. So it is disability rights and being an advocate, and identifying as disabled myself, and just being able to, what came up in the workshops working with the disabled actors was the things that they were divulging and they were saying, and what some of what does appear in the film. This was the first time, as a couple had mentioned to me, they were able to actually voice that stuff out loud. So to be able to be part of that process, it was a real privilege to do that. Audience wise, I hope it resonates with disabled audiences. I want them to feel seen, and hopefully that their voices have been heard. But I'm very keen for it to resonate with non-disabled audiences, because that's where we're going to really make the change. If they can see what steps they can perhaps make and how they can do things differently by watching our film, then if one person that can change one person's mind, then I've achieved what I wanted.
Yeah. Obviously, the new series of Sex Education came out. That is one of my favorite shows, and I've been binge watching the new season. And as I was watching it, I thought about your film. Obviously, I don't know if you've seen Sex Education, but there's a lot of different representations of disabled people as well as queer people. So I wondered, while I was watching, I was wondering, how do you feel about the representation of disabled people in more contemporary media? Do you feel like it has gotten better, or is it just raising more awareness? I think other examples would be like Coda, which came out a few years ago, versus some older films like Rain Man or My Left Foot, where the disabled people are played by very ableist or able-bodied people.
Yeah, I have a lot of views on this subject, because so in 2020, alongside Diane, who's from Bedazzle Inclusive Productions, we started a talent agency, Inclusive Talent, which is for deaf, disabled, neurodivergent actors. So it's very much is a talent agency putting actors forward for work, but it is an advocacy based role as well, because we are wanting to see actors where disability isn't part of the plot, but the authentic representation. I feel that we have made some, we've had actors in some great stuff, and we are part of that change, and it's exciting to see. And it's exciting to see what the broadcasters and streamers are signing up to do around access, but we do have a long way to go. The barriers we face all the time is we do get actors recast if they have an access requirement, and that just should not be happening in 2023. We have some very ableist language that's used a lot in scripts. It's used a lot, which can be very challenging actually, and it's used a lot in casting breakdowns, which we always do challenge, and we do go to the people who are writing this just to say, this is not what we think is right. But it comes down to the way our actors can be treated on set sometimes, and there's a long way to go, but we are making steps into it. But you can feel like you're getting so far then being pushed back, which is really difficult, but we're advocates for authentic casting. So if it's an autistic role, it's an autistic actor. And yeah, just really listening to pushing for individual access needs, which we do with inclusivity films as well. It's access riders for everyone, regardless of how they identify, from the very first point of pre-production, so you don't have those issues when you get to set, like, of people not being able to access the world fully or the set fully. And we just want all production companies to think that, and it could be as simple as asking a question: do you have any access requirements? Do you have any access requirements for this Zoom meeting or this audition or whatever it is? It takes the onus off of the disabled person who may not want to bring up what their access needs are. And it's just that, okay, I can actually speak about this with you, and this is what they are, and feel that you'll be listened to. It's a subject I could probably go on about all day. So we are getting better, and there are commitments from people high up in the industry. My feeling is that commissioners need to really trickle down that message to the people they employ in production companies, because we see the wonderfulness coming from commissioners and the speak about it, but we're not seeing it when production companies approach us for actors.
Yeah, especially now that you just mentioned some of those things, like that, or do you need any accessibility for the Zoom meeting? Those are things that, like, I have recently just been diagnosed as autistic. I obviously, like you have said, I have always felt like I was an outsider in the world, and I've always felt very different. And I did resonate with that scene where it's like, it's okay to go and do things by yourself, because I love my own company. I love hanging out by myself. And I guess living in this able-bodied world, I have just become accustomed to, no one has ever asked me if I need any accessibilities for, my social anxiety or dealing with social situations. That's where I really struggle. So it is really, there is an awareness even for people who are disabled, who are living in a society that is, not accustomed to including them, to even, unlearn those things that able society has taught us. So that's, a really great thing that you're doing. Is there sort of a goal, say 5 years from now, that you would like to see in the film industry in particular, with disabled actors or writers, producers, directors?
Yeah, I would love to see it to be truly reflective of society. So 1 in 5 people identify as deaf, disabled, neurodivergent, or actually 1 in 5 people identify as disabled. So to have that reflected on screen and then off screen as well, like, that would be huge. And talking of the on screen stuff, we are seeing it a bit more, but off screen we're just not seeing it as much. And what I quite often find, the disabled talent who are off-screen talent that I speak to, is they are being put through training programs, but they're not being given the opportunity to progress on from there. So I think it's great that there are these training opportunities and schemes, but we also need to focus on how can we then help them to progress and become HODs and such.
So at Film East, we work with a lot of young people who are interested in films. We're not a filmmaking organization, but we do have a lot of people often coming to us, young people who are at the start of their career. And so they have a lot of questions about how to get into the industry. Whenever we interview filmmakers or creatives, I always want to take the opportunity to get their perspective on that, and get them to reflect on how they would ask or what they would tell to a young person who's just starting off in the industry, how they can start their career and progress, and perhaps make their first short film.
I would say just grab your friends, anyone that's interested. It's about finding your collaborators, whether you find them, from your peer group where you live, or it's people online, or I know that there are several different film hubs around the country that can recommend people to you. It's finding a few people you can get together with and just go out and shoot something. Shoot it on your phone. I watched a great film last week, which is by Jack R.H. O'Sullivan, who I co-produced Tourette's and I with. And he's an autistic director, and he's shot his last short completely on an iPhone. So, and there are feature films that are shot on an iPhone. There's so much you can do. And there's some great apps out there to support this as well, with sound and the camera. So I would say just go and do it, but figure out what it is that you want to say. What's your story that only you can tell, or that you're really passionate about and want to tell? And once you figure that out, then I think it's just about going and doing it.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about typical or filmmaking in general?
I think my motto in life and filmmaking is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And it can be really difficult sometimes, because places can feel like a closed shop, for sure. However you identify, and I've said about not fitting in, being working class, I often feel that way as well. I don't think there are many of us that still live in social housing, but we are there. And it's like, how do we break those barriers down? But I have had a lot of success where I've just gone to like big names and big companies and just said, look, I'm making this is what it's about, what it's doing for representation, and is there any chance you could help us? And more often than not, they say yes. So I think just be bold and ask.
Oh, that's a great sentiment. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Sarah.
Thank you, Shelby.